Hi everyone, welcome to Pokemon Draft League 301. This video is going to be talking about different mindsets that you can have as you are building your Pokemon team from your roster. So in specific, we're going to be going over two team building methods as well as what it looks like to plan for an early game of your match. As a disclaimer, there are multiple examples used in this presentation based on previous games that were happening in the 2024 Draft League. Um, all of these didn't actually match up to how they went in game, but I still think they're helpful in like showcasing these examples in how they would actually work out. So the first team building method I want to talk about is called reactive team building. This involves starting by focusing on your opponent's roster. You identify the threats and what they might bring, where their strengths lie and their weaknesses lie, and then you build your team to address those threats. This doesn't mean that you always build a defensive Pokemon necessarily, but the idea is that you structure your team in a way that addresses the threats. You can think about checks and counters. Checks are Pokemon that can't switch in, but if they are already in, then they can beat an opposing Pokemon 1v1. Counters are Pokemon that can switch in, take a hit, and then still beat another Pokemon 1v1. This does happen to work well with defensive leaning rosters, but again, it's not restricted to just having a bunch of defensive Pokemon. The example I wanted to give is John versus Nathan from last year. This isn't something that happened during the actual game, but I work with John with mock battles, and this is something I found out as we were playing. Um, so Nathan has a Gliscor, which if you don't already know, is a very defensive Pokemon, especially with its ability Poison Heal. It's able to poison itself with an item called a Toxic Orb, and then restore let's see, 1/8 of its health every single turn. This works very well with Protect and makes it very annoying to take out. Um, John ended up bringing a Klefki, a Pokemon that is a steel type, so it can't get poisoned. But more importantly, he brought a switcheroo Pecha Berry Klefki. If you don't already know, Pecha Berry is an item that cures poison for whoever it is holding it. So what he's able to do is that he's able to click Switcheroo, switch the Toxic Orb with the Pecha Berry, cure Gliscor of its own poison, and then hold on to a Toxic Orb and hopefully maybe poison another Pokemon going forward. So this is something you're never gonna see in anywhere else other than draft, but this is a great example of reactive team building. So the pros for reactive team building, the big thing is hopefully pretty obvious. It accounts for your opponent. It forces you to think about their side, and hopefully it prevents you from being super surprised at something they might bring later. This can also be a good starting point, or maybe a breakthrough point, depending on where you are at in the team building process. Uh, the cons of reactive team building, this is really dependent on your opponent. You have to rely on them to bring what you think they might bring. And this can also be mentally taxing, trying to think about every possible opposing team combination. The second type of team building I wanted to share is called proactive team building. What this involves is actually starting with your own roster. From there, you can identify which Pokemon work best against your opponent's roster, and then you can think about like what other Pokemon you can add to supplement it. This works well with offensive leaning rosters when you have ways to hit your opponent hard. So an example would be the Lucas versus Mayak video that was present in the 300 level video, as well as a match against me and Sarah from last year. So I have some more slides to explain to it. But before we go on, I just want to explain that reactive and proactive, there's not one that's necessarily better per se. Maybe depending on your roster, it could be worth starting with one more, but I find that the most effective way to team build is kind of switch between one and the other. So this is the roster layouts between me and Sarah. I'm the one on the left, Sarah's the one on the right. I can see that Sarah has a lot of great defensive Pokemon in Gastrodon, Magnezone, as well as a lot of good offensive Pokemon. There's Espeon, there's Chandelure, the Iron Treads, Overqwil can all be threats. Um, for this specific example, I was kind of messing around but back and forth, and I actually found that this Lycanroc set, Lycanroc speed ties with Espeon, which is Sarah's fastest Pokemon. And with these four specific moves, Close Combat, Trailblaze, Crunch, and Drill Run, it actually hits pretty much everything on Sarah's roster for super effective damage and pretty much like one-shots everything. Um, with that in mind, I had to go back to like a reactive mindset, think about what can actually stop Lycanroc. And I wrote the list of the potential options here. The water ground types, if they're physically defensive, they don't get one shot by Trailblaze. If Espeon runs max speed, it could win a coin flip and then knock out Lycanroc. Iron Treads can run a booster energy to get +1 in speed, and then it's an easy one shot for Lycanroc. And then Overgrowth, if it sets up rain, then Lycanroc Dust gets destroyed by a liquidation from Overgrowth. From there, I decided to, oh, the boxes are all messed up. But I decided to like build the rest of my team around that, in that Persian was able to carry Sunny Day to try to counteract any rain dances from Gastrodon. Florges carried grass type moves, and my Thunderstorm did as well, but it carried grass type coverage to try to account for the water and ground types. And the Dunsparce carried Glare, which was a move that was able to paralyze Iron Treads actually, as well as the Espeon. So this was me being intentional with what moves I put on my Pokemon in an effort to try to check off certain conditions and then figure out when is the right time for Lycan Rock Dust to sweep. Another example I want to share here is between me and Jeff. Once again, I spent a long time, longer than anyone should have, staring at Jeff's roster screen. Jeff has a way of just like making all of his Pokemon just work super well. He does a great job at customizing his roster team every week to exactly what he's hoping for. So I spent maybe a couple hours thinking about what Pokemon he could bring, what Pokemon he might not bring. Um, so from this reactive mindset, this wasn't super great for me either. But when I started to look at my own Pokemon, I realized like, oh, this Thundersterian actually like kind of smokes this entire team. Jeff doesn't have a ground immunity at this time. The only natural switch in that he can have is this Regidrago with it, which has a lot of HP. But from there, Florges actually serves as a massive counter to Regidrago, being immune to all of his dragon moves, not taking a lot from an ancient power. And from there, I was able to build the rest of the team to try to adjust that as well. So going back to you and what that means for your Pokemon builds, hopefully you can have a clear sense of when you bring a Pokemon on the team, what is their role specifically? Are they meant to be a wall breaker and hit hard? Are they meant to be just a Pokemon that pivots around to other Pokemon that are better suited to hit hard? Are they meant to be a designated counter to a specific opposing Pokemon that when that Pokemon comes out, you know that you can switch in your own Pokemon? Maybe they're meant to be an anti-lead, which is meant to come out turn one with expecting another Pokemon to do something, and you do something to immediately counter it. And what their role on their team is should influence how you build them. It should influence whether you dump your IVs into defense or attack. It can influence whether you have a defensive or an offensive Pokemon build. It can influence what moves you bring. In this case, Discharge is slightly weaker than Thunderbolt, but is 3 times as likely to inflict paralysis. So that might be something to think about. Or maybe they're a lure. By that, I mean that on paper, it sounds like they're beaten by an opposing Pokemon, but they're actually built in a way that allows them to beat what their counter should be. All of this to say, it's possible for you to bring the same Pokemon every single week with the exact same spread, and that's not necessarily the wrong answer. But if I ask you why you built it the exact same way, you should have a good answer as to why, as opposed to every other build. Now, let's talk about early game planning. This just means in the first few moves, you should have an idea of what you want to do and what your goal is. To do this, you should think about your end game. Like, what are you trying to reach to in order to win? And what conditions need to be met to get there? Um, this can influence how you play your early game. Maybe this means that at the very start, you want to make sure you have stealth rocks up. Maybe that means that you have to start with a choice band Pokemon to immediately start punching holes in your opponent's team. Maybe, again, you might want to be an anti-lead and disrupt your opponent's lead Pokemon with a move like Taunt or Switcheroo with the Choice Scarf. You should also think about where the match goes for the next few turns. When thinking about your lead Pokemon, it does not need to have an extremely good matchup against every single Pokemon that your opponent could bring. But if they bring in a Pokemon that your lead Pokemon doesn't do well against, you should have a plan for what's your next switch in, what's your counter to their Pokemon that's good. It could be helpful to write it out, but the main point is that you should not be caught up in be caught off guard for whatever Pokemon that your opponent might bring, and you should play towards your end game. I put this example here from my own notes because I thought it's helpful to just take notes on everything. And for every Pokemon that you bring, why do you bring it the way that you do? So for this Sneasler, I start off by saying what it's meant to be. This is meant to be the lead, or more specifically, the anti-lead. This is against an opponent that I know likes to bring Galvantula and set up Sticky Web. So I brought normal gem plus fake out to break focus sash on Galvantula, activate Unburden, and put Galvantula into Dire Claw range. I talked about all of the moves that I bring and why I brought them. I mentioned that activating Unburden is actually going to beat a Ditto that could be on her team. And I have acrobatics to beat a Ditto that has transformed into my Sneasler. And because I have Unburden to double my speed, I don't need to run any speed on it. I can run an Adamant Nature as well as max HP to tank hits. So that's everything I have for this video. Um, if you want to start learning about how to reflect those roles in your EVs, you can watch the 302 video. Otherwise, there should be a short video with the 303 video on what mock battles are and just closing thoughts, a summary. But that's everything I have on my end. And I hope you have a great day.